Good evening, everyone. I'll call to order the budget hearing and annual meeting for the Oregon School District for 2017 at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, September 25th, and we're at Oregon High School in the Innovation Center. I'm Steve Zock. I'm the president of the Oregon School Board. This is a meeting for the electors of the Oregon School District. It is comprised of two parts. One is a budget hearing and the other is the annual meeting. We'll proceed as prescribed by state statute, and the meeting will be governed by rules of parliamentary procedure. We have an agenda for tonight's meeting which will follow as our guide, and those are over on the table in the orange. Before proceeding to the budget hearing, I'd like to introduce members of the board who are present tonight. Barb Feeney, the vice president, is here. Krista Flanagan, as our clerk, is here. Jeff Raymond is absent and out of town. Dan Kraus is here, who's a member of the board, and Tim LeBrun, who's also a member of the board, is here. So we'll proceed with the first part of our meeting tonight, and that's the budget hearing. Before proceeding into a presentation by Andy Weiland, our business manager, I want to note that our books have been audited by Johnson and Block and Company, and the board reviews that with Johnson and Block. So that's part of our financial obligation and oversight on behalf of the district. Also part of that is a requirement that we have a budget hearing, and that includes a presentation from Andy Weiland, and after his presentation we'll have an opportunity for some questions before we proceed to the annual meeting. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. So the budget hearing, typically like to start that with just a little bit of a review of what happened last year, because you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. So again, I'm Andy Weiland. I serve as the business manager for the school district, and let's talk a little bit about the results of last year. I will mention that the audit is mostly done. We don't have the copy of the document yet, but it has been sent to the Department of Public Instruction and done the appropriate reports so that they can figure our state aid for this year. So as Mr. Zock just mentioned, our books have been audited. This is just a letter from them saying they've basically have started completed most of the process, and they'll be issuing a more comprehensive report in the future. So let's talk a little bit about what happened this last year from kind of the 50,000 foot view. We're going to go fast so that we can kind of get through all this, try to be concise. The original budget from a revenue, we're going to look at this a couple different ways. This is Fund 10 and 27. Those kind of are basically the two funds that work together. Fund 27 is basically a subpart to some degree of Fund 10. If Fund 27 doesn't have enough revenue, Fund 10 basically gives it to it. So we combine those two. Fund 27 is basically for special students with special needs. So the original budget was about $47.5 million. What we actually spent was $47.1. So we actually underspent the budget a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about that for about less than 1% off. That's a little deceiving because of two things. We're going to talk a little bit about the home construction house. Basically, there's $400,000 in there for revenue and expenses that we didn't realize because the house wasn't sold until about 2 weeks or a week after July 1st. This report is as of July 1st. It goes from July 1st to June 30th. So because that wasn't recognized yet, it wasn't in there. You'll see this next year. We'll have a doubling of that if we sell this next year's house in 17-18. The other thing that didn't happen like we projected it to happen was TIF. This village has a TIF district which is ending, and there's about $371,000 that we were anticipating to receive last year because of some changes that the village made. They didn't give that to us, and we didn't spend that money. So if you actually took the revenues out of there, those two revenues, if they had happened like we had planned, or we had taken them out because they didn't happen, we were actually brought in more money than we had anticipated by approximately 0.73%, so about 0.75%. On the expenditure side, same type of thing happened, except we had another expense that we didn't fully spend. So we had the TIF money that we didn't spend, which we were going to use on the pool project, which we may still use on the pool project this year, and then we didn't obviously expense the house project this last year. So if you take those two, you're around $771,000, but we also didn't spend all of the employee comp money. That's still there. and we're implementing that over time. So that's another $600,000. So if you had spent that or not had that in the budget, basically we were within 0.25% of our budget number. So my target is usually 1%, so we were very close to that. Now let's just look at it, okay, from a budget and expenditure point of view. How was this thing set up from the beginning? The original budget back in October, that's why we put October there, showed actually a $676,000 decrease in fund balance anticipated. That's all because of carryover. We had projected to use funds that had been carried over from prior years, and so in order to do that, you have to budget expenses over revenues. What actually happened was we actually increased fund balance by $446,000. Kind of basically because of all those things I just talked about, we didn't spend as much money as we had thought we were going to. So that takes us to what's called assigned fund balance, and those are the funds that we were left with at the end of the year that we anticipate spending in future years. So building a departmental carryover was about $625. The compensation system for the OEA is $672,000 that will be spent this year and next year as it's implemented. And then curriculum development for virtual instruction, that's a carryover from about 6-7 years ago. For summer curriculum work, that's $62,000. And then technology infrastructure, about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, we basically upgraded our wireless system. That was over a $500,000 project, and we basically funded that over 5 years. This is the last payment for that, so that will not be showing in the future. So for an assigned fund balance of $1.5 million almost to be spent in 17-18 if everybody spends everything that they're allocated. Referendum debt. This is a different fund. I'm just kind of going through this very quickly. We have equity of $871,000 basically. Those will pay for these payments that you see down below here that we have this year. And you'll see if you take the equity minus those payments, you're going to have about $31,000 left. We also have non-referendum debt, same type of thing. We have equity of $55,000. We have a payment of $32,000. We have $22,000 left. Sometimes, basically, those funds don't always line up perfectly because of just the debt service schedules. When we levy them, is a little bit different than how they're spent. So nothing to be worried about there. Eventually, that will catch up. Fund 47 improvements. This is what we had left, basically, that we're using to do all our capital improvements. As of July 1st, we had $6.3 million left. Basically, things that we're still working through, mostly at the high school. You saw some of the stuff that we're standing in right now is still being paid out, as well as the Commons project, a lot of the renovations this summer, and then also the storage building, which we're just undertaking right now. Food service fund. Spent a little bit of time on that in the past. It seems to be popping up and doing a little bit better than it has been. We had revenues of 1.4, expenditures of less. Some capital expenditures last year of about $10,000. We actually had an equity increase, good thing. So we have a little bit more money. This year we're spending a little bit of that equity on some equipment and some improvements at the high school. So we might not have quite an equity increase this next year, which is fine. The idea is that this fund's not supposed to make a lot of money. It's supposed to reinvest in itself and make sure that the equipment works for our employees and for our students. Community Service Fund. This was kind of reorganized a few years ago. The idea is to get that last number down to 0. And so we were actually fairly close with over $600,000 worth of revenue and expenses. This basically pays for the different things that we do in the community, the fall catalog book, as well as it pays for some summer swimming lessons and those types of things which are in the book, and also pays for a little bit of our Performing Arts Center and some other youth type things that we do in the district. OPEB Liability Employee Trust. This fund basically pays for 2 things. DPI only recognizes that it was one fund, but basically when our employees cash out their sick leave at the end of the year, or when they retire from us, there are 2 choices for those funds to go. One can be set aside for insurance purposes for employees. The other one, or they can take it out into a 403B or a deferred comp program. The employer decides that to keep it tax-free, and at least until they realize those funds. And so that's part of this. The other part is we're basically starting to pre-fund our post-employment liability, which basically is related to people getting health insurance after they retire from the school district. So you can see we were able to contribute a little bit more this year to that fund. We have a total equity of $4.2 million. We had investment returns. This is a new requirement, been in place for actually a couple years. We had investment returns of $24,000, and the required note on the bottom is I serve the business manager as the investment manager for funds. We're very, very conservative with where we put those funds. That's probably actually a criticism to some degree, but we always prioritize not losing the principal of those funds. So OPEB liability over time, you can see the contributions. Not going to get into the implicit rate net effect. If you want to talk about that later, I'm happy to share some information with you. But let's just focus on the bottom here, where we have the liability of $10 million about 2 years ago. We're down to about $4 million. Part of that is the increase in the assets that we put aside for this, and part of that is how we restructured our liability a few years ago. So when you combine those two together, you can see that we're a little bit over $4 million for the two. OPEB's on the right, employee trust is on the left. The employee trust shows it going down. No worries about that. Those are funds that were put away for our employees in a particular employee's name. So as those funds are drawn, they utilize those funds. So that being said, just checking time here. I'm right on time. We're going to talk a little bit about the preliminary budget. So we know where we were. Last year was a fine year. Everything worked fairly well. No real big surprises other than not selling the house and not getting the TIF dollars. But the preliminary budget for this next year is a fairly decent budget as well. You may have known that the governor signed the budget into law this last week, and so that gave us some certainty. When this was put together, that obviously wasn't done. It was about a month ago that we put this together. We also hadn't had Third Friday, so we didn't know what our student count is. We basically have to submit our Third Friday on this week, I believe. So we do know those numbers now. So this information's a little bit old, but it was our best guess at the time. And things aren't significantly different. They're a little bit different, and we'll present those in the original budget at the end of October to the board for passage. So the preliminary budget's just kind of part of the annual meeting. We've pushed this a number of years ago as late as possible, but it's not the final numbers, which obviously from preliminary makes sense. So next year we'll present this in September again, and the original budget and the tax levy are approved at the end of October. Enrollment is estimated. We originally started with a zero, we did. A zero base per member increase from state budget. That means that the revenue limit wasn't increased at all. It was zero. There's a new categorical aid, which is the next line item for $200. So basically, we will not have to tax, or we don't have the taxing authority to get any additional funds unless we have an increase in enrollment, is what that means. The general state aid is an estimate. We'll have that in October, so we'll know what that number is, but we recalculated it based on our expenditure numbers, and we feel fairly comfortable with that. Special education aid is prorated at 26%. That was the best estimate from the Department of Public Instruction. And equalized value is estimated at 5.5% for tax levy purposes. I believe that's a little conservative. I'll share that with you now, but it is hard for me to estimate that for another couple weeks here until it's known. So revenues, where do our funds come from? You can see that about 43% come from property taxes and about 39% come from equalization aid from the state, basically. And then there's other smaller sources that include federal sources, some different state sources, and local revenues. So major revenues, about 82% of our funds come from the revenue limitation formula, which essentially means that it's based on the number of students we have. This year, we had about a month or two ago, we had estimated at about a 73 increase in the number of students and full-time equivalency of students for a 3-year average, because there's an averaging component here, so it kind of takes the dips and stuff out and blends them a little bit, of a 57 student increase, which would translate into about a $620,000 increase in revenue. That's going to come from two sources, state aid or property taxes. And then we had the per pupil aid increase. We did, about a month ago, anticipate that we were going to get that $200 based on everything that the legislature was saying, so we had that kind of baked into our numbers. An open enrollment increase was based on $100 for regular education students and $12,000 for special education students. My understanding is that's going to change based on the state budget that was approved, but I think it's delayed for a year. I don't think that happens until 2018-19 because it was so late in the process. New revenues, if you add those things up, this is obviously from 50,000 feet, you get about $1.63 million, $1.636 million. That's probably a little bit high based on what I know today, but we're again in the ballpark. And they make up the majority of the new revenues this year. So equalization aid, this is kind of a fun little thing that I like to do. The last column is probably the most interesting column for me. That doesn't show up when you do it on a screen. The TIF out-of-state percentage, basically what that's trying to estimate is how much of our assessed value is basically a percentage of the state. And what happens to that? What's going on with that? And you can see that we've actually gone up a little bit. We don't know what this year's number is. Last year we went down. The reason that's important to me is that basically is kind of a marker for us to where we might get to what's called negative tertiary aid, which puts us into a different situation. Negative tertiary aid, a number of the school districts around Madison are in. Basically that means as you spend $1, right now we get 3 or 4 cents back on that dollar from the state. When you hit negative tertiary aid, you lose 3 or 4 cents, depending on how much wealth you have behind each student. So that's kind of a marker that we keep track of, and that's what that's to show us. Expenditure for purposes for this next budget is we have about 54% is built into instruction, 18% administrative and support, that's support service as well as administration, so things like libraries and guidance counselors, those types of things, principals. Maintenance and operations equal about 16%, technical services, transportation make up other components of it. Sorry, I think I skipped a slide. There we go. This is kind of an important slide. It shows where our money's spent as well. You have 55% in salaries and about 20% in benefits. So you're over 75% in basically people. We're a very people-intensive business. Purchase services make up 16.6%. That's in a lot of different things from transportation to buildings and grounds type services are charged in that area. And then the other components make up the other pieces. So we get into kind of where we are, what's revenues and expenses in our operating funds, which basically is 10, 27, and 38, basically the revenue limitation funds. And we have a revenue budget projected this next year of $50 million, $50.6 million, operating expenditure of $52.1. I talked about using those assigned funds, and basically you can kind of see that happening there. We show a decrease in fund balance of $1.5 million. So the carryover, general fund, and the carryover and technology infrastructure will add up to that 1.485 million. And then this non-referendum debt is that Fund 38 that I was mentioning. So these basically, these down here add up to this number. Referendum debt, just something to mention real quickly. We have a cliff coming. It's not a huge cliff, but it is a cliff where we're going from a little over $4.3 million down to 3.8 something related to referendum this next year. So this year's the last year of that cliff, and then we'll be going down, and you can see we're very steady after that amount, after that year. Food service had a little bit of an increase. You approved that yet in July, and we're budgeting revenues and expenditures. Again, we're not trying to make money in that fund of $1.463 million. We'll see how that plays out. Capital projects fund, we have to use that $6.3 million by, I believe, the end of March. We also are anticipating some additional revenues in that fund related to focus on energy. We've done a number of things related to our buildings, which were focused on energy incentives, and so we anticipate over $130,000 related to that. So we'll actually be spending closer to $6.5 million, hopefully again by the end of March. Employee trust funds, we talked a little bit about this before. Just kind of move on with that. Community Education Fund. These are the different components of that fund. Pool operations, performing arts center, community education outreach, and building security. The security, basically we hire a company to make sure our buildings are locked at night on Saturdays and Sundays. This is a lot of words which we're required to provide to you during this presentation. Basically talks about the purposes of Community Education Fund. Happy to send that to you if you want to read it later. I know it's a lot of words. Tax levy calculation. Operational, $20.9 million. Non-referendum, $525,000. Referendum approved debt, $4.3 million. You saw that cliff. It's going to be going down to under 3.8 or 3.9 next year. Community education, community ed services, so $482,000. Prior levy chargebacks, just a little thing where if we have to pay a municipality back because they weren't able to collect money, we get to collect that money from the constituents to make up for that. Simple $521 this last year. And then computer aid is actually a reduction. It's a revenue source we get, but we're required to take that off the levy. This is what I anticipate to happen with the equalization valuation, about a 5.5% increase, but I still show our mill rate going down. Again, I think that 5.5% is probably conservative, so my hope is mill rate will even be less than the 11.64 that's shown there. These are some simple charts that you could maybe see from back where you are. Equalization age is kind of the yellow line going across. Operating property taxes is going up a little bit as we've grown, and then equalization value is going up a little bit more steady than the other lines as we've had some growth in our district. And then kind of in reverse to that equalization value number going up, you can kind of see things plateauing a little bit with our mill rate and then starting to drop a little bit as the equalization value goes up. So it's got cut off a little bit. Sorry about that. Basically, we're $59.1 million for all our different funds. And I thought we corrected that, but the 6 is supposed to be up by the 42 there. The expenditure budget, it actually showed correctly. About a $66.6 million. Now you might be saying, wait a minute, didn't you just show us $59 million in revenues? And yeah, there's this carryover thing going on, this assigned fund balance that you're using. The big difference is the capital projects fund. We only have $131,000 in revenue in that fund, but we're spending the rest of the funds for the referendum, so that's why the expenditure number is so much higher. This is my favorite sheet, as I love to call it. It kind of shows everything in the district and what's happening from all the different funds that we have, almost all. There's some other small ones that are not tax fundable, but you can kind of see from each area what's happening. Basically, you show in the general fund a decreasing fund balance. If we spend all the funds that we have reserved of about $1.5 million, we're even with donations funds. That's where we run a lot of our our student activities out of, as well as we do have some donations that are provided to us. Special education fund. We show the transfer that I was talking about before from the education to special education to make that a zero fund at the end, which is required. Non-referendum debt fund goes down a little bit, not a big deal. Debt service fund goes down a little bit, again, not a big deal. We have enough money to meet our obligations. Food service, we're showing a zero. Referendum bonds, we show a zero. Food service, we show zero at the end of the year. And trust funds, we show a little bit of an increase again. Community funds, we're shooting for that zero that I talked about before. And cooperative purchase fund is basically a federal grant that we are administrative agent for a number of districts. And we're looking for a zero there too. I think that's all I have. Any questions related to the budget? All right, I'll take that as a no.
Thank you, Andy. And as you can see, our district's in really good financial situation right now. That takes us to the second portion of this evening's annual meeting, and that is the annual meeting itself, and I'll call that meeting to order. The first item of business is to elect a chairperson for the meeting. Are there any nominations for the chair? Krista?
I'll nominate Steve Zock to be the chair.
Okay, any other nominations? And are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to close nominations and to cast a unanimous ballot to have Steve Zock serve as the chair of the meeting. Is there a motion to that effect? Courtney Odorico. Mr. Kraus with a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And I will appoint Gina Jonan to serve as parliamentarian for tonight's meeting. We need to adopt the ground rules. The ground rules are in the orange packet, and so I need a motion to approve the ground rules that's set forth in that document. Is there a motion to that effect? Barb Feeney with the motion. Is there a second? Tim LeBrun. Is there any discussion regarding the ground rules? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the ground rules as set forth in the packet before the electors signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ground rules are adopted. Also in the packet present tonight are the minutes of the annual meeting held last year on September 26th of 2016. It's not recommended that we approve those, but they are there by reference. And if anybody in the community wants a copy of those, they can contact Janie Wick at the district office. And now I'm happy to turn the microphone over to Brian Bussler, who will give us a state of district report before we engage in our new business. Dr. Bussler, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everyone. I think I know just about everyone in the room except two people in the back, and I will meet you at the end. You might be here for a class, is that right? Precisely. Well, welcome. You will learn a lot at your likely your first annual meeting. This is a little sign that is in Oregon High School, and I saw it the first day of school and was just impressed with how our kids react to one another. And you can see our 5 values. There's a picture coming up on our 5 values, but it hits likely 3 or 4 values. And a board member sent me an email over the weekend and said, you should include that in this year's annual report. I thought it was a terrific idea, so here it is. You are loved, you belong here, you are welcome here. OHS, a place for all students. That has been something we've been working on for a long, long time and will continue to work on. We are a school district for all students. Just a really quick reminder, here's our mission statement. Dates back to 1991-92, helping students acquire the skills, knowledge, and attitude needed to achieve their individual potential. We do that every day for 4,000 kids and for our community. Here's our 5 what we value statements, as well as a quick summary underneath each one. You'll notice at the center is the whole child emphasis, and as we move around the puzzle pieces, relevant and empowering learning, education equity, strong family and community partnerships, caring and professional educators, and then at the heart and the center, our whole child emphasis. Here are 5 board priorities. Every year our school board gets together in early May. This year I think it was May 15th. And we identify what I'll call board priorities. For those of you that have been at meetings before and you've heard us talk about board priorities, you will notice there is nothing new on this list. Maybe a little bit reformatted, but overall, our first priority, the path forward, the paper that the board wrote last year. Overseeing phase 2 of the teacher compensation plan. You might remember last year at this time we were crazily making it to about 60 different meetings to share information about the teacher compensation referendum. That was coming up on November 8th. Our third item, this is the second year of our equity initiative. We are beginning to work with school leadership teams in every building. Last year, we worked with a group of 60 to 75 school staff on the equity initiative. Task forces, nothing new. If you've been in Oregon before, you know we utilize a task force model. The environmental task force completed a report last year. We're implementing that in 2 phases. The growth and sports task forces started in February, March of 2017 and are in full swing right now. I'll share a little more information about the growth task force on an upcoming slide. And then the information that Andy shared, closing out our construction projects. I came up with 3 words to identify the state of the school district, and I got to choose these words, so they are all mine. Positive, connected, and growing. And I have a few examples underneath each word. First, under positive, this time I added relationships. It's something we heard back in 2015 from our students that were part of the student panel at the Visioning Conference. The community support and partnership that we've had is at an incredible high, whether it's referendum passage, whether it's information on surveys, volunteer hours in the Oregon School District, or a new group that's 3 years old, the Friends of Oregon School District. Under labor relations, that was one of our priorities a number of years ago as we were coming out of the Act 10 era. The board president and I meet in a leaders meeting. It was something one of our previous board presidents, Dan Kraus, started, and Steve and I have continued to do that over the last couple of years. We've done a lot of employee handbook work. Annually, we work with our school staff on joint professional development planning, and I think we're at an all-time high with a positive spirit of working together. School culture. We know from research any school district that is successful has an incredibly positive school culture. It is clear to see stakeholders love our schools. They love our teachers. The student, parent, and staff surveys that we do annually suggest a high level of school culture and a high level of support, and our strong cultures are focused on students. Here's a picture of our school board. Carolyn, your picture isn't in there. We haven't had a picture of our new school board, but this was our school board this last year, and you can see our 7 board members along with a student rep. I do think it's really significant that our board views the importance of having a student representative on the board. That is critical. That doesn't happen in a lot of school districts. I think it's another indicator of our strong school culture. This is something that made my knees shake. And not a lot of things make my knees shake, but back in 2015, we had just completed a survey, and it was on our teacher compensation plan, and we were looking at about a 32% pass rate on a referendum if we were to go to referendum at the time we did the survey. We all know we need 50%. Here's November 8th, 2017. We were at 65%. And now it's easy for me to say, I anticipated after listening to community members at the meetings that we went to that there was strong support. But I did not predict there was 65% worth of strong support. That's a 33% gain over January of 2015. Incredible. This is the group that I mentioned earlier, the Friends of the Oregon School District. I'll call it a grassroots group of parents that support our schools, and they started working on students that qualify for free or reduced lunch, sort of a poverty measure. 10 years ago, that figure was around 5%. Today, it's around 19%. Their initial project was kids learn best when they are fed, healthy, and have a positive environment within which to learn. We can never have too many Friends of Oregon School District groups. Again, another picture and a picture of that little sign that's been up in our school district. When our students see this on their own, a teacher didn't ask them to put this up. The principals didn't ask them to put this up. This is what they wanted to, this group of students wanted to welcome 1,200 students back to at the beginning of the school year. I take zero credit for that. I know the high school administration takes zero credit for that, but that is a testament to the quality of young people that we have in our community that want to make sure that everyone's involved, included, and part of a successful school. Bravo and hats off to our kids. The second word, connected. Connected in 3 different areas: students, community support, and ongoing learning that builds educator capacity. On students, this last year, our graduation rate was down from 99% to 98%. Still, on a statewide basis, very, very high. We heard from students the first day of school. This year, we pulled everyone together in the new gymnasium because we finally have a spot where we can bring everyone together. And we had 3 high school students talking about the importance of positive relationships. Now, this is 2017. We heard that in 2015 at the Visioning Conference. These are different students, but sharing with us a similar message. One of the other beauties as a school system, and I'm bragging a bit right now, we educate all students. We have programs for all students. We're large enough, being at 4,000, that we can have comprehensive programs. Not all Wisconsin public schools can do that because of size and because of financial limitations with their budget. Another connected piece is community support. Whether it's the Friends of the Oregon School District, the passage of 2 referendums, which to me has always been the ultimate measure of community support. If a community is willing to invest additional funds that its public school doesn't have, it's only going to do that if A, it believes the message, and B, if it perceives its school district moving in the right direction. We also heard that from 2 vision conferences. Who would give up 2 days in lovely July or August when most of the participants, or at least 50% of the participants, needed to take 2 days of vacation? That competed with a lot of other things. Going to the beach or zoo with your kids, spending time doing your favorite thing, whatever that favorite thing is. And I contacted each one of those individuals that attended personally. And to a person, I had a couple of no's, and it was no because I have a previous commitment. But the response yes rate had to be close to 95%. That is a group of community members that support our public schools. Then the last item, ongoing learning builds educator capacity. At the center of that has been our board papers for several years. And our newest board paper on the path forward. Connected to ongoing educator capacity are the 4 pathways. Leslie and John and a group of administrators have been working on this since the day the referendum passed. This year we rolled out 4 main pathways. 1, highly effective practices. Secondly, educational equity, educator effectiveness, and then pathways aligned with our school district vision that are prepared by school staff. I'll let you read these student panel comment themes. This goes back to 2015, and it could be 2017. I think it likely will be 2018 and 19 as well. Students over time have told us positive connection with educators, and that means everyone. All school staff, anyone that works with young people, they're educators. Another piece is access to a variety of learning options. I have the opportunity to interact with literally hundreds of superintendents and administrators across the state. We have a very, very unique program in Oregon. One of the benefits is we've had some financial stability over time. I've worked in a few districts, some that had financial stability, or actually most that had financial stability and incredibly fast growth, but I spent some time in a district that also didn't have financial stability because of the way the state funding formula works, and the conversations were always about how can we save money, how can we reduce programming, and what we have is something that is very, very rare and very fragile. I hope you all listened to every word Andy said, because, well, maybe not every word, right? Most of the words that Andy said, because one of the things that is a unique characteristic is financial stability in our school district. Every year when we have the district office art show, the same parent comes up to me and he chats. He's done it 3 or 4 times, not every year. And he said, I don't really know how you guys do this every year, but we continue to have school with stability. And I look around in Dane County, which is still a growing area, and other school districts don't have that stability. We can't take for granted the positive impact that financial stability has on our ability to provide learning options for kids. Then lastly, and this continues, again, no surprise to anyone, the positive impact with co-curricular activities. We offer a wide variety of co-curricular activities. At the high school alone, close to 600 students participate in co-curricular activities. What we want, it's not important which activity they participate in, it's important they participate. It's important they participate at the middle school. That builds character, integrity, sportsmanship, the ability to win, the ability to lose, the ability to take a risk in non-sporting activities. It is such an important part of young people development. Then lastly, growing. I don't know how many times we can say it. We have to be one of the fastest growing school districts in the state over the next 10 years. Community growth, whether it's the Highway 14 corridor in Fitchburg or the west side of the Village of Oregon, and most recently the task force work with Mark Roffers. We are in an enviable situation with our community growth. But with community growth comes community responsibility. And with community responsibility causes elected boards to navigate what the future is going to look like. It's not always clear. It's not always easy. But it's a great situation to be in. Student enrollment's on the rise. This last year, our kindergarten enrollment was just under 300 students. I can remember for years when we were hoping that student enrollment at the kindergarten level would hit 220 students or 230 students. I remember back in 2009, we graduated the largest class ever in the history of the Oregon School District at around 340. The second grade class is just over 300 now. Likely they will be the largest class to graduate from the Oregon School District until this next group of kindergartners graduate 3 years later. We have become a destination district in Dane County. The pathways for learning, the faculty and staff learning with highly effective practices, that is a growing practice. There are some school districts that don't have the resources, the ingenuity to pull off that kind of a change. We're right in the center of it. The board has made, and community have made, a substantial investment in professional development. That's the right investment to make. Growing our practice is the way that we have increased staff capacity and the ability to address challenges and opportunities that frankly years ago we didn't know about. One of the biggest ones is mental health. 10 years ago, no one talked about mental health challenges. Now we know we need to be at the forefront with mental health challenges. This is still under the growing theme. Here's the outdoor educational center between Prairie View and Netherwood. Transform that space from what was not the safest space in the world, where parents would drop off kids and kids would navigate between two schools. Now it is a beautiful, safe space. Also connects with our environmental priorities. Here's old and new Brooklyn. I remember when I came to the district on the old side, that was New Brooklyn. I thought, wow, that looks like a great entrance. That was before we were concerned about school violence. And all of a sudden, what appeared to be a great entrance was no longer up to date in terms of societal demands. The new entrance on your right, it is incredible. I know all of you have been at Brooklyn. It has transformed our school. It has transformed the greater Brooklyn community. I happen to hear about it all the time because I live in the Brooklyn attendance area. And parents are talking to me all the time about the transformation that occurred at Brooklyn. There are all the happy kids waving goodbye to the bus driver. They're an important educator in our community too. And they understand that. And they've worked with us, and they've been part of our professional development plans as well. Oregon Middle School went through an incredible transformation. On the left side of the screen, the middle school was designed in the 90s at a time when principals' offices were buried in the center of the school. Now, I think it was fall, winter of 2016, 2015, we opened up the safe and secure environment. Then on the right side of the screen, that's our STEM, our STEAM wing. STEAM has been a huge priority in our district, dating back 4 or 5 years, and one that a local group, our local Rotary group, really put a big emphasis on STEAM education. Oregon High School, many of you came through the main entrance today, and what a beautiful main entrance that's safe, secure, gives us the opportunity to have better student flow in our campus. And we are about 99% complete. Jim's just giving me a 1/4 inch of completion yet to go. Another project that the board's been working on is work with our Vision Steering Committee. This is the implementation of our next steps. Again, another growing phase. We completed the phase 1 of our focus group listening, and that was hearing from our school leadership teams about what's the best way to implement the board plan. We're now into phase 2, and this is a book study. We're looking at 2 seminars to work on with our school leadership teams. And then lastly, phase 3 in that February-March range, building our collective future at the school leadership team level. Here was a slide I was referencing on our Student Growth Task Force. Again, information that you have already heard. Our Highway 14 corridor in the Village of Oregon growth. Perhaps the biggest area, the 2,000 student increase by the year 2030. 2,000 student increase when you're only 4,000 students is really, really significant. That is going to change the school district. A few parents and community members have asked me, how are we going to navigate through that change? And one of my reactions, I think the biggest challenge, how will we be able to continue to have that small community feel as we grow as a school district? I believe that to be at the center of our 5 values, but that will be something that's going to take work and take effort to maintain that over time. We know the task force is preparing and studying facility options to address student growth, and they will report their findings to the school board visioning committee in January, February, maybe March of 2018. So that concludes my official remarks, but I'm happy to take the dozen or so questions that okay, people are smiling at me, so they're listening. If you have a question, I'd be happy to respond to that. I'll even respond to it from two guest students if you have a question. Okay, back to our board president.
Thank you, Brian. And I'll need the clicker. That takes us to old business, and we have no old business tonight, so we will go on to new business. We have 5 items that we need to consider at the annual meeting. The adoption of the tax levy, the adoption of school board salaries, the sale of real estate, purchase of utility poles, and then setting the date for next year's meeting. So let's move to Resolution A, which is the adoption of the tax levy. You'll find that as item 8A in your packet, and the motion we would need would be to adopt the levy as follows. The total levy would be $26,213,548 pursuant to the budget that Andy has outlined. So that would be the motion that we're seeking this night. Do I have a motion to that effect? Krista Flanagan with the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Bart Feeney with the second. Is there any discussion regarding this? All those in favor of the resolution to adopt the tax levy in a total amount of $26,213,548 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Our second item is to adopt school board salaries, and the recommendation is to maintain the salaries in their current amount, which are identified on the screen and in packet item 8B. So I would entertain a motion to adopt the salaries as indicated pursuant to the resolution on the screen in item 8B.
So moved.
Yes?
I would recommend that board members that are impacted financially by this motion go ahead and abstain from voting.
Okay. And the suggestion from the parliamentarian is that present board members abstain. With that, I would
So moved.
motion by Mr. Wyland. Is there a second? Mr. Pliner with a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries, and I will note that, who abstains on the motion? Raise your hand. I'll note that all board members abstained, all board members present abstained in that motion and vote. The third resolution tonight is to sell real estate to Gorman and Company. When we sold the property to the Gorman and Company a few years ago, there was an error in the recording, and there's a small portion of land that didn't get transferred to them that needs to get transferred. So we've reached an agreement with Gorman and Company to sell that land for $1 to complete those negotiations. So the resolution that would accompany or that take care of that is item 8C, and is as identified on the screen, is to authorize the board to sell the property to the Gorman and Company or its successor assigned for $1, and to complete negotiations with Gorman to proceed with surveying and all other actions required to ensure the sale of that property. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Mr. LeBrun with that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Flanagan with the second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. The next motion is to approve the purchase of 2 ATC transmission poles and to complete negotiations with ATC to proceed with those actions. There are 2 transmission poles.
Just one.
Just one?
Yep.
Just one transmission pole that we that they want to get rid of, and we want to purchase that carries our cable, right?
A fiber optic.
A fiber optic. So I'd entertain a motion to that effect. We need to do this at an annual meeting.
So moved.
Okay. Mr. Tanner with the primary motion, Mr. Wyland with the second. Any discussion regarding that motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. And finally, we need to set the date for next year's annual meeting, and we recommend that the fourth Monday of September at 6:30, which would make that September 24th, 2018. Is there a motion to set the annual meeting for next year at that time and place? Ms. Wick with the motion, is there a second? Mr. Kraus with the second, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? That motion carries. And we have one final business. Is there any other new business before the electorate tonight? Seeing none, we need one final motion. And that'd be to adjourn the meeting. I see Mr. LeBrun waiting to make that motion. Is that correct, Tim? Okay, is there a second to that motion? Mr. Wyland with a second to adjourn the meeting, the annual meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. And opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you for attending, Dr. Bussler and Mr. Wyland. Thank you for your reports. We're in great shape because of your efforts and those of the administrative team and all our staff.